When Thomas and Lily bought the small, sun-warmed house at the end of Willow Bend Drive, they thought they'd finally found peace. The property sat on the edge of suburbia, close enough to the city for convenience, but far enough to feel like its own little world. With a modest yard, a white picket fence, and a handful of shady oak trees, it seemed perfect for their next dream, keeping a few backyard chickens for fresh eggs. It started simple. Lily had always loved animals, and Thomas saw no harm in a small coop tucked neatly behind the shed. They built it themselves over a long weekend, carefully measuring, hammering, and painting until it looked more like a rustic playhouse than a farm structure. The couple brought home 4 hens from a local rescue. Plump, gentle birds with quirky personalities that made them instant favorites. They named them Penny, Ginger, Dot, and Hazel. Each had its own way of exploring the yard. Penny was bold and often the first to find worms after the rain. Ginger strutted like royalty, her feathers a fiery gold. Dot was curious but cautious, and Hazel, the youngest, often perched on Thomas's shoulder as he worked. For a while, life was peaceful. The soft clucking of hens became part of the neighborhood's morning soundtrack. Kids walking to school would pause to watch them through the fence, and the mailman occasionally dropped off bits of vegetable scraps to feed them. But as with many suburban dreams, trouble didn't take long to find them. Their next-door neighbor, Carol Simmons, was known as the watchdog of Willow Bend. A retired accountant with an eye for order, she spent her days maintaining her flower beds, polishing her mailbox, and taking mental notes of everyone else's business. Carol wasn't just particular, she was territorial. The faintest deviation from her idea of perfection, an uneven lawn, a misplaced trash can, a Christmas light left hanging too long, triggered her need to intervene. At first, she pretended not to notice the chickens. But the day she saw one pecking near the fence line, something inside her seemed to snap. She began observing them daily from her window, notebook in hand, documenting every flutter, every sound. The clucks that once blended peacefully into the neighborhood rhythm now seemed, to her, like constant noise. It started with small, passive-aggressive comments left in the community Facebook group about livestock in a residential area. Then came the printed letters slipped under Thomas and Lily's door, unsigned, but unmistakably written in Carol's crisp, formal handwriting. They cited vague neighborhood rules, none of which actually existed. The final straw came 2 weeks later when Carol contacted the county's code enforcement office. An inspector appeared one afternoon, clipboard in hand, to investigate a complaint about unauthorized farm animals. Thomas showed him the coop, clean, odor-free, well-built, and fully compliant with local ordinances. The inspector, almost apologetically, confirmed that the chickens were perfectly legal. Still, Carol stood across her yard with arms crossed, glaring as if justice had somehow been denied. From that day on, the situation escalated. Carol began recording the chickens, claiming their clucking was disruptive. She sprayed her side of the fence with some foul-smelling deterrent, hoping to keep them away. Once, she even called animal control after claiming the birds had escaped, though they were never out of the yard. Thomas tried to ignore it, but Lily began to worry. She'd put her heart into raising the hens, teaching them to perch, building them a little ladder, even decorating the coop with hand-painted signs. They weren't just animals to her, they were part of her peace, a small joy that made the world feel softer. Watching someone try to destroy that felt deeply personal. Still, she tried to find humor in it. When Carol's third complaint was dismissed, Lily posted a picture of the hens online, a funny snapshot of Ginger standing proudly in front of a "wanted" sign Thomas had jokingly made. She captioned it, "Neighborhood outlaws, feathered and fearless." What happened next was completely unexpected. Within hours, the post went viral. Thousands of people shared it, laughing at the absurdity of suburban drama over a few harmless chickens. Comments poured in from fellow chicken owners, city dwellers who dreamed of rural peace, and even local journalists amused by the story. By the next morning, the account had gained tens of thousands of followers. Lily started sharing daily updates. Coop cam, videos, feeding time clips, and the occasional dramatic retelling of Carol's antics. The internet fell in love. People started calling the hens the Willow Bend Girls. Fan art appeared. Memes circulated. Someone even started a parody Twitter account written from Penny's perspective, narrating her battle for freedom against the neighbor. Carol, however, was far from amused. Seeing the story spread online, seeing herself thinly veiled as the neighborhood villain, pushed her temper to new limits. She called the HOA, the city council, even the local news station to demand that the post be taken down. Each time, she was told the same thing: the chickens weren't breaking any rules, and the story was harmless fun. But to her, it wasn't harmless. It was humiliation. She started retreating indoors, her curtains drawn tighter each day. The once pristine lawn went a bit unkempt, and for the first time, her garden didn't win the annual neighborhood award. But she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. While Thomas and Lily basked in the warmth of their viral fame, Carol was plotting something much colder. The chickens had become local celebrities. But fame, as they were about to learn, came with a cost. And as the sun set over Willow Bend, Carol stood by her window, notebook in hand once more, not to record the chickens this time, but to plan the next move that would bring them down for good. The battle between peace and pettiness was only just beginning. The next few weeks transformed Willow Bend Drive into something of a quiet circus. Cars began slowing down in front of Thomas and Lily's house, with curious onlookers hoping to spot the Willow Bend Girls. Parents took photos of their kids near the fence, and teenagers filmed TikToks pretending to interview the chickens. It was harmless, cheerful fun, at least for most of the neighborhood. But not for Carol Simmons. To her, the viral fame wasn't a joke. It was a stain on the once respectable image of the community she'd worked years to uphold. She saw her quiet, orderly street becoming a zoo, and her name whispered online by strangers mocking the angry neighbor. Every time she refreshed her phone and saw another meme or video about the chicken lady next door, her resentment grew deeper. One morning, she finally snapped. It began subtly. A mysterious note appeared on the HOA bulletin board warning residents about unauthorized filming in the neighborhood. A week later, another notice claimed that animal noise complaints were under review. None of these were official HOA documents, but they bore the same letterhead and format Carol had access to from her years volunteering as treasurer. Soon, whispers started spreading among neighbors. A few began avoiding Thomas and Lily, unsure whether the couple was breaking some rule or attracting too much attention. Others stopped by with sympathetic smiles, saying they'd been warned not to interact with the chickens because of ongoing legal issues. Carol's campaign of misinformation was working. Lily felt the shift immediately. The cheerful waves from neighbors turned into cautious glances. The mailman stopped bringing scraps. Even the kids who once loved the chickens now walked by quicker, urged on by worried parents. Thomas tried to brush it off, but the online fame that had once felt exciting now carried a heavy edge. Trolls began appearing in the comment sections, accusing them of exploiting animals or disturbing neighbors. Lily deleted the worst ones, but it stung nonetheless. And then, one afternoon, they found their fence vandalized. The neat white boards had been splattered with dark paint. The words, Cape UED, scrawled in shaky handwriting. The chickens, startled, had fled to their coop, clucking anxiously as Thomas examined the damage. They filed a report with local authorities, but without security footage, there wasn't much to do. Still, they knew exactly who was behind it, even if she'd never admit it. But rather than back down, Lily did something that would completely change the course of the feud. That evening, she posted a video. It wasn't one of her usual cheerful updates. Instead, she calmly showed the vandalism and explained how it all started. The harassment, the fake OA letters, the endless complaints. She didn't name Carol, but she didn't need to. The internet quickly connected the dots. The video exploded overnight. Millions watched, commented, and rallied in support. People from all over the country began sharing their own angry neighbor or HOA stories, tagging Lily's account as a symbol of defiance. The chickens were no longer just cute pets. They were symbols of standing up against petty control. Support poured in. Fans offered to donate to repair the fence, and one local artist volunteered to repaint it with something beautiful. Within days, the once vandalized boards were covered with a stunning mural, a bright, colorful design featuring the four hens surrounded by flowers and musical notes. Across the center, painted in bold letters, were the words ATMUCK. It was defiant. It was loud. And it was right across from Carol's kitchen window. The day it was finished, Carol's curtains stayed shut. But she could still hear the laughter, the car stopping to take pictures, and the sound of the chickens clucking proudly beneath the painted mural. That night, she made her next move. Under the cover of darkness, Carol contacted animal control again, this time claiming that the chickens were attracting vermin, and posing a public health risk. She submitted fabricated photos, images taken from other online sources of messy, filthy coops pretending they were from Thomas and Lily's yard. By morning, an official notice had been taped to their door. It demanded an inspection, citing multiple, anonymous complaints. When the inspector arrived, he was surprised to find the coop immaculate. The hens healthy, the yard clean. He took pictures, checked feed storage, and even complimented Lily on the setup. The case was dismissed again within hours. But the damage was emotional. It was exhausting to constantly defend themselves against one woman's endless bitterness. Lily began losing sleep, anxious every time she heard footsteps near the fence. Thomas installed cameras around the yard, determined not to be caught off guard again. Yet through it all, their online following only grew. Local media caught wind of the ongoing feud, dubbing it the Chicken War of Willow Bend. Reporters began showing up, eager to film the mural and meet the famous hens. One clip, a video of Penny clucking right as a journalist asked about neighborhood tension, went viral again. The internet laughed, the news outlets laughed, but Carol wasn't laughing. She'd tried to shame them, isolate them, even scare them. Instead, she'd made them into folk heroes. And the more she tried to fight it, the more the world sided against her. By the end of the month, Carol was no longer just an irritated neighbor. She was an infamous meme. Online, people referred to her as Cluckzilla. Her pride couldn't handle it. So, in a final attempt to reclaim control, Carol decided to strike back. Legally, she began compiling a file thicker than a phone book, evidence of noise disturbances, proof of zoning violations, and witness statements from 2 of her friends in the HOA board. She planned to take Thomas and Lily to small claims court, demanding they remove the chickens and the mural for the integrity of the community. What she didn't realize was that by doing so, she'd be walking directly into the trap Thomas was already setting. One built on patience, precision, and a little bit of irony. Because Thomas had been documenting everything, every false claim, every note, every visit from inspectors. He'd quietly built his own case, not for court, but for the world to see. And when the time came, that world would be watching closely. The battle lines were drawn. The next phase of the war was about to begin. And this time, it would play out far beyond the fences of Willow Bend Drive. By the time Carol Simmons officially filed her complaint with the county, the story had already evolved into something much bigger than a neighborhood squabble. What began as a petty feud over chickens had snowballed into a full-blown cultural moment, one that Thomas and Lily never expected to become the face of. Local news outlets followed every twist. Online creators dissected the feud in real time, pulling public records, replaying clips, and even analyzing Carol's blurry appearances in the background of videos. Comment sections were filled with tens of thousands of people rooting for Thomas and Lily, the underdogs standing up against pettiness, control, and HOA tyranny. Carol, of course, didn't see it that way. To her, this wasn't entertainment. It was humiliation. She believed she was defending her neighborhood standards, yet everywhere she turned, people laughed at her expense. Neighbors she'd once considered allies now avoided her out of embarrassment, afraid of becoming part of the online spectacle. Still, she pushed forward. Her official claim stated that the chickens violated zoning ordinances, that the mural constituted unauthorized street-facing advertising, and that the noise exceeded acceptable decibel limits. She framed it as a matter of community peace and property value preservation. When Thomas received the notice of hearing, he smiled, not out of arrogance, but readiness. He'd spent months preparing for this moment. Every complaint, every baseless claim, every email and recorded phone call had been carefully saved. He knew Carol's downfall would come not through anger, but through evidence. The day of the hearing arrived, and the small municipal chamber filled with local reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Even some of the HOA members attended, most pretending to be neutral, but their eyes revealed quiet amusement. Carol sat at the complainant's table, prim, composed, and armed with binders. Thomas and Lily, by contrast, arrived calmly, carrying one small folder and a quiet confidence. When it was Carol's turn to speak, she presented her grievances as though delivering a closing argument in a courtroom drama. She described sleepless nights, relentless clucking, tourist traffic, and social media chaos. She handed in printouts of memes, screenshots of videos, even photos of cars parked near her driveway, claiming it all as evidence of harassment. But the more she spoke, the more absurd it sounded. When it was Thomas's turn, he began methodically dismantling every claim. He presented inspection reports proving their coop met all regulations. He showed emails from the county confirming that backyard hens were allowed. He even produced footage from his security cameras, showing Carol herself walking up to his fence on the night of the vandalism, clutching a can of spray paint. The room went silent. Carol's composure cracked for the first time. She tried to argue the footage was misinterpreted. But the timestamp, location, and camera angle made it undeniable. By the end of the hearing, the decision was unanimous. The complaint was dismissed entirely. But Thomas didn't stop there. He handed the board a final document, a formal report detailing Carol's repeated false complaints, harassment, and HOA misuse. It was copied to the county and the HOA's oversight committee. The hearing adjourned, but the fallout was only beginning. Within days, the video of the hearing leaked online. Clips of Carol's flustered reactions spread across social media like wildfire. Commentators praised Thomas and Lily for their calm professionalism, while Carol became a cautionary tale, the face of entitlement gone wrong. The story reached national outlets this time. Major news sites covered it under headlines like, "Chicken Couple Triumphs Over HOA Bully" and "When a Karen Meets the Internet's Favorite Flock." Memes resurfaced, merchandise popped up, and fans flooded Lily's inbox with messages of support. Even local businesses began reaching out. A nearby coffee shop offered to host a Cluck Fest charity event featuring live music and photo ops with the Willow Bend Girls. Proceeds would go to local animal shelters. The once simple backyard now resembled a tourist attraction. The mural fence became a selfie hotspot, and Lily leaned into the momentum by posting daily coop updates, showing the hens pecking, nesting, or curiously inspecting the cameras. It was joyful again, but it came with a tinge of disbelief. Thomas often reflected on how absurd it all was. A feud born from one neighbor's bitterness had turned into a movement about community, resilience, and standing up to unreasonable authority. He hadn't planned it, but the story had taken a life of its own. Carol, meanwhile, retreated from public life. She resigned from the HOA, citing stress. Her once pristine yard grew unkempt as she withdrew indoors, the blinds always drawn. Neighbors spoke of rarely seeing her except for brief, tense walks to the mailbox. But in her absence, something else began happening on Willow Bend Drive. Without Carol's constant interference, the community grew warmer. Neighbors began talking more, collaborating on small projects, and sharing produce or tools. Even the HOA's tone shifted, less controlling, more cooperative. The chickens had, in a strange way, healed the neighborhood. Still, Thomas sensed it wasn't over. Carol's pride was too deep, her resentment too potent. He could feel the storm before it returned. And when small, strange things began happening again. Footprints near the coop, missing mail, faint scratching at night. He knew the peace was fragile. One morning, he found a small note pinned to the fence. It wasn't signed, but it was unmistakably her handwriting. It read, "Enjoy your circus." But every circus ends. Thomas pocketed it, said nothing to Lily, and quietly adjusted the cameras once again. Because if Carol was coming back, she'd find that he was ready. And this time, the entire internet would be watching from the front row. For a few weeks after the ominous note appeared, things returned to a strange calm. The neighborhood hummed with quiet activity again, the chickens clucked peacefully, and the air of hostility seemed to fade, at least on the surface. Yet, beneath that peace, an undercurrent of unease lingered. Thomas noticed subtle changes, small footprints in the flower beds. The gate sometimes left slightly ajar. A faint, unfamiliar odor of paint one morning, which he later discovered came from a faint streak on the side of his garage, as though someone had tried to start another act of vandalism but stopped midway. He didn't need proof this time to know who was responsible. Carol was back, and she was being more careful. Meanwhile, the world outside Willow Bend still buzzed with the couple's fame. The chicken house remained a beloved local landmark. Families visited to take photos, children laughed as the hens waddled around in little costumes Lily made for fun, and even tourists passing through stopped for a peek. It was charming, harmless, and genuine, the kind of small-town joy that everyone seemed to crave in a world obsessed with conflict. But for Carol, it wasn't joy. It was mockery. Hidden behind her blinds, she watched the stream of people stop by Thomas's yard daily, camera phones flashing, laughter echoing. Her once pristine view had turned into a symbol of her failure. The neighborhood she once ruled through HOA intimidation now looked up to the very person she'd tried to drive out. Bitterness consumed her, and soon she decided to reclaim control in her own way. Late one night, she began filing new complaints under different names. Fake residents, fabricated signatures. Each claimed that the increased traffic, the noise, and the lights from the chicken park were disrupting peace. Some even accused Thomas of operating an illegal business. The HOA received dozens of these letters in a single week, all neatly typed and suspiciously similar in tone. At first, the board dismissed them as spam. But when Carol anonymously forwarded them to a local official, they triggered a formal investigation. Inspectors once again appeared at Thomas's property, measuring decibel levels, checking zoning boundaries, photographing the coop. It was déjà vu. But this time, Thomas wasn't caught off guard. He greeted them politely, provided all the proper documentation, and even offered them coffee while they worked. The inspectors, clearly sympathetic, admitted that they were required to follow up on every complaint. Once they were gone, Thomas smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Because what Carol hadn't realized was that every move she made was being recorded. The cameras, upgraded after her last attempt at sabotage, captured not only the approach to his property but also her driveway and mailbox. And on a windy Tuesday morning, one of those cameras caught something extraordinary. Carol herself, stuffing multiple envelopes into her own mailbox, each bearing a different name but all written in the same distinctive, looping cursive. Thomas didn't release the footage immediately. He waited, gathering more. He let her dig deeper, file more complaints, and continue her crusade unseen. In the meantime, Lily kept posting cheerful updates, unaware of the quiet battle happening behind the scenes. The chickens, now part of daily life, continued to charm the internet with their clumsy antics and gentle personalities. Their social media following crossed 500,000, attracting sponsorship offers and even a short local documentary deal. It was poetic. The very birds Carol had despised were now generating more goodwill, influence, and joy than anything she'd ever contributed to the community. But the breaking point came one afternoon when Thomas received a letter from the HOA's interim president. It stated that due to repeated disturbances and visitor traffic, a vote would be held to determine whether his public presence violated neighborhood standards. Thomas read it twice, then calmly placed it on the table. He'd expected this. Carol's fingerprints were all over it. So he decided to end it once and for all, not with anger, but with spectacle. When the HOA scheduled their vote, Thomas quietly organized an event of his own. On the same day as the meeting, he announced the Willow Bend Chicken Jubilee, a charity fundraiser benefiting local animal shelters. Flyers went up across town, and local media promised coverage. When the day arrived, the HOA's small conference hall was nearly empty. Only a few residents, including a furious Carol, attended. Meanwhile, outside, hundreds of people filled Thomas's yard, laughing, dancing, and enjoying food trucks. Local musicians performed under strings of fairy lights, and the chickens, wearing tiny hats and harnesses, roamed happily among the guests. Even the mayor stopped by for a photo, praising the event as a beautiful example of community spirit. Carol watched from a distance, fuming. The HOA president checked his phone, seeing message after message about the event trending online, and sighed. By the time the board was supposed to vote, it was clear that the issue was meaningless. Public opinion had already spoken. The vote never happened. Later that night, after the last guests had left and the lights dimmed, Thomas uploaded one final video. A calm, respectful message addressing the harassment, the false complaints, and the importance of community resilience. He ended it with a short clip of Carol's mailbox footage, proof of her anonymous letters, and a single sentence. Sometimes, silence isn't peace, it's patience. The internet exploded. Carol's actions were exposed for all to see. Within days, she was removed from the HOA entirely and received a warning from county officials for filing fraudulent complaints. Neighbors, once intimidated by her, began reclaiming their own voices. They painted fences bright colors, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and stopped living under fear of arbitrary rules. The neighborhood transformed, not by force, but by example. Thomas's chickens became the unofficial mascots of Willow Bend, appearing in community posters, fundraisers, and even a children's book Lily illustrated called The Cluck Side of the Fence. And Carol. She sold her house within 2 months. Rumor had it she moved to another town, somewhere far away, somewhere without chickens, without murals, and without anyone who knew her name. But even after she left, her legacy lingered, not as authority, but as a reminder of what happens when control meets resistance and loses. The backyard that once started it all stood unchanged, vibrant, peaceful, alive. The chickens still clucked softly in the mornings, their feathers gleaming in the sun. The mural fence still caught the eyes of every passerby. And for Thomas and Lily, it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace, one act of quiet defiance at a time. The days following Carol's public downfall brought an eerie calm to Willow Bend. The neighborhood, once consumed by quiet hostility and whispered HOA threats, now basked in an unfamiliar sense of unity. It was as if the tension that had clung to every porch and cul-de-sac had finally loosened its grip. For Thomas, that calm was both a relief and a responsibility. The video exposing Carol had gone viral, spreading far beyond their town. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a modern-day David vs. Goliath story, a man standing up against petty neighborhood tyranny. Comments flooded in, praising his composure, his creativity, and the poetic justice of the entire situation. Yet, fame brought its own kind of pressure. Every morning, Thomas found himself checking messages, replying to reporters, and politely declining offers for TV interviews. Sponsors wanted to turn the chickens into branded mascots. Influencers reached out, offering collaborations. What had started as a simple act of defiance had turned into something far bigger, something neither he nor Lily had ever intended. Still, they approached it all with humility. Their social media became less about the feud and more about kindness, humor, and small-town joy. Videos of the chickens walking down the street in little costumes, helping promote local events, or simply pecking around the yard filled the feed. People loved it because it wasn't polished or fake. It was genuine. But not everyone in Willow Bend embraced the newfound spotlight. A few residents, those who once sided quietly with Carol, now felt uneasy about how quickly the story had grown. Some complained about strangers driving through the neighborhood, taking photos, and slowing traffic. Others grumbled about Thomas, turning everything into a show. Though the majority stood by him, Thomas sensed the subtle divide forming again, the same kind of undercurrent that had once given Carol her power. He decided to get ahead of it. Instead of retreating, he leaned into community spirit. He proposed a neighborhood event, the Willow Bend Garden Revival, a weekend where everyone could open their yards, share gardening tips, and celebrate creativity. The idea wasn't about chickens or fences this time, it was about reconnecting. To his surprise, nearly everyone agreed to participate. Even those who had kept their distance before joined in, perhaps out of curiosity or guilt. The event was a quiet success. For 2 days, residents wandered through each other's gardens, sharing stories, recipes, and laughter. Children painted rocks for decoration, local musicians played soft acoustic tunes, and the neighborhood felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. It wasn't perfect. A few stubborn homeowners still muttered complaints. But it was a start. Meanwhile, Carol's old house sat empty at the end of the cul-de-sac. Its for sale sign faded by the sun. The grass grew uneven and the once perfect flower beds wilted. It stood as a ghost of the old OA era, a silent monument to what happens when control gives way to compassion. But then something unexpected happened. A young couple bought Carol's house, Ethan and Maria, newlyweds from out of state. They were friendly, enthusiastic, and brimming with ideas. From the moment they arrived, they introduced themselves to everyone, baked cookies for neighbors, and even asked Thomas if he could help them build a small garden coop of their own. Thomas chuckled at the irony. The very property once owned by the woman who despised his chickens would soon house its own. And so, with his help, they built a modest coop in the backyard, painted it soft green, and named it Feather Heaven. When they posted pictures online, Thomas's followers immediately noticed and celebrated the poetic twist. For the first time in a long while, Willow Bend felt balanced, not flawless, but human. Yet, despite the peace, Thomas couldn't shake a strange feeling. There were moments, usually in the quiet of the evening, when he'd catch himself thinking about Carol. Not with anger, but with curiosity. Where had she gone? Did she ever reflect on what happened? Or was she somewhere else, repeating the same patterns under a different OA's rulebook? Sometimes he wondered if she regretted it. Other times he suspected she didn't at all. But he didn't dwell on it long, because, in many ways, she had given him, and the neighborhood, an unexpected gift. Through her stubbornness, she had forced them all to confront the toxic culture that had crept into their lives. Her obsession with control had accidentally created the very rebellion that freed them. By spring, the story of the internet chickens had faded from national headlines, but it remained a cherished local legend. People still stopped by occasionally, asking to see the famous coop, and Thomas always welcomed them warmly. The mural fence, once a symbol of defiance, now stood as a piece of neighborhood identity. Children painted small handprints along its edge each year, marking the passage of time. The HOA, now under new leadership, even featured it in their community brochure as a celebration of creativity and resilience. If Carol could see it now, she'd probably have screamed, but Thomas only smiled, because what began as an act of quiet rebellion had transformed into something far greater. A lasting reminder that sometimes the best way to fight control isn't with anger or revenge, but with joy that refuses to be dimmed. That night, as the sun dipped low and the chickens settled in their coop, Thomas stood on the porch, sipping his coffee. The soft hum of crickets filled the air. He watched the lights flicker in the windows of every home. Peaceful, calm, connected. He thought about how far they'd all come, from fear to laughter, from complaints to community, from enemies to neighbors again. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something pure and complete. Peace. Years passed, and the legend of the internet chickens gradually evolved from viral fame into local folklore. What began as a petty neighborhood squabble had turned into something much larger. A story parents told their kids as a lesson in standing up for themselves, and a reminder that community didn't have to mean conformity. Willow Bend had changed. The HOA, now under transparent and reasonable leadership, became less about control and more about care. The endless violations and fines that once plagued residents were replaced with genuine neighborhood support. Yard assistance programs, social nights, and collaborative beautification projects. The community, once rigid and divided, became vibrant again. But none of that would happen if not for Thomas, his resilience, and those chickens. The coop still stood proudly at the side of his home, freshly painted every spring, adorned with flowers and tiny nameplates for each of the chickens that had come and gone. Tourists still stopped by occasionally, not as frenzied fans anymore, but as admirers of the story. Some even brought their children to see where it all happened. Thomas had long stopped keeping up with social media fame, though the accounts remained active. Now, it was Lily who managed them, documenting life at the coop, sharing funny stories, and posting clips of community events. The page had evolved from a protest platform into a place of joy, peace, and humor, a digital scrapbook of neighborhood life. Even Ethan and Maria, who bought Carol's old house, had expanded their coop. They named their flock after famous composers, adding a whimsical touch that made everyone laugh. On warm evenings, the two coops created a kind of gentle music, soft clucks, rustling feathers, and the occasional proud squawk echoing through the air. It wasn't noise anymore. It was harmony. But what truly cemented the legacy of the chickens came one spring morning, when Thomas received an unexpected letter. It was from a local elementary school, inviting him to speak at their Community Kindness Day. The children had learned about his story, about standing up to unfairness with creativity, about finding joy in the face of stubbornness, and wanted him to share it in person. Thomas hesitated at first. He had never seen himself as a speaker or a symbol of anything. He was just a man who wanted to keep his chickens in peace. But Lily encouraged him to go, reminding him that sometimes the simplest acts could inspire the most change. So he went. Standing before a classroom of bright-eyed kids, he told them the story. Not the viral version, not the internet sensationalism, but the real one. About a man who was told no, for no reason. About a woman so obsessed with control that she forgot how to live freely. About a neighborhood that learned to laugh again. The children listened intently, some giggling at the idea of chickens becoming celebrities, others nodding solemnly at the lesson of kindness over conflict. When he finished, one little girl raised her hand and asked if he was ever angry about what happened. Thomas smiled softly and told her no, not anymore. Because anger fades, but creativity lasts. When he left the school, he noticed a new mural painted on the wall near the playground. It showed a cartoon chicken standing proudly on a fence, wearing a crown, surrounded by colorful houses and happy neighbors. At the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Kindness always wins." He stood there for a while, letting the moment sink in. It was strange to think how something so small, a coop, a complaint, a viral video, had rippled outward, touching people far beyond Willow Bend. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas sat on his porch watching the chickens settle in. The soft clucks mixed with the distant laughter of children playing down the street. Lily joined him, handing him a cup of tea, and they sat in quiet contentment. From where they sat, the neighborhood looked almost magical. Flowers blooming, porch lights twinkling, and the faint outline of murals and coops scattered among the homes. What was once a battleground of pride and control had transformed into a place of creativity and compassion. Even the HOA newsletter now carried a new slogan: Community through creativity. It was a far cry from the rigid rules and reprimands of the past. As night settled, Thomas reflected on the strange, beautiful path that had brought them here. He thought of Carol again, wherever she was. Maybe she'd seen how things turned out. Maybe she hadn't. Either way, her story had become part of something bigger. Proof that even the most unpleasant people can accidentally spark change. He took one last look at the coop. Inside, a new generation of chickens was beginning to roost. Fluffy and clumsy, unaware of the legacy they carried. The coop light flickered gently, casting long, warm shadows across the yard. It wasn't just a chicken coop anymore. It was a symbol, a memory, a landmark born from defiance, grown through laughter, and sealed with peace. And as Thomas closed his eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the night, he smiled. Because in the end, what began as petty neighborhood drama had turned into something truly extraordinary. A reminder that the best revenge isn't anger or destruction, but joy so loud that no complaint can silence it.